This video is brought to you by my Patreon subscribers. Thanks for keeping the show going.
Did you guys know when you signed on to do this that it would become what it has become?
No.
Absolutely not.
It's been a roller coaster.
We need you to remain disciplined.
This is a film that's very much centered in wholesome, good family values, right? Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think people can learn something from that. Does it bring a sort of a sense of relief to parents out there? Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I'm glad that we're representing something wholesome for kids.
When High School Musical 3 came out in 2008, I was struggling. I was 13 and was realizing that I was gay. My best friend was a girl at school who I spoke with mainly through MSN Messenger. In a very odd early internet friendship, we did see each other at school, but didn't hang out much in person, despite being best friends online. One day she told me she was bi, and it clicked. I was gay. I came out to her an hour later and started slowly coming out to my close friends while keeping it a secret for most people. I was still sad though. It was great to come out to people and learn about myself, but I was still sad. Almost as if I had a rain cloud following me around like in cartoons. It would be a long time until I understood this discomfort as trauma and gender dysphoria. And I wasn't gay, I was trans. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew is that High School Musical 3 had just come out and I was excited to see it. I remembered the absolute hysteria from when the second movie was released just a year before. Everybody at school loved the first High School Musical, but the build-up to the second was unlike anything else. Many months before the film even came out, Disney Channel was asking fans to vote on polls that would actually affect parts of the movie. And in the week before the film came out, there was a lot of hype that ended with a whole release party that aired just before the premiere. But my family wasn't living in the US when the third movie came out. And since I wasn't watching TV as much as I had before, I missed a lot of the hype and marketing. So I just had my memories of how much I loved the High School Musical movies. So one day we drove to the movie theater to see the third one, since it was the first in the series to not premiere on the Disney Channel. It was okay. I remember my siblings liked it a lot, and I heard many of the songs in the car on my way to school. But it would be well over 10 years before I saw it again. High School Musical is a series of films following Troy Bolton, Gabriela Montez, and their friends as they navigate, well, high school. Troy's a basketball guy who plays for the East High Wildcats, and Gabriela's a math science girl, and the three movies show them building friendships and deciding what their futures will be. The main thread is the tug between Troy, basketball, and musicals. He feels pressure from his family to be a basketball star, but after he falls into musicals by accident, he's surprised at how much he enjoys singing as well. In the first movie, this becomes a sort of coming out story. Him wanting to sing is shown as feminine, and it causes school-wide hysteria when people learn that he isn't the hypermasculine basketball guy they idolized. And with antagonists Sharpay and Ryan trying to keep their hold on the theater department and a blossoming romance with Gabriella, accepting himself is just one of the things on Troy's plate. The situations and settings change in the second and third movies, but that's kind of the core of the franchise, being yourself and being honest with others. And as each character goes through their own little arc of self-expression, by the end of the third movie, it's totally clear that the only thing you can be is yourself. I know, we'll get to them, don't worry. But High School Musical doesn't exist in a vacuum. These movies were incredibly inspiring for kids growing up and learning what it means to express themselves. But they're also more complicated than that. Like a lot of pop culture, the High School Musical films also reflected a part of US society, a particular time and place. Children's movies in general are entertainment, but they're also for teaching children morals and helping them fit within society. So, when we look at what exact values and social roles these films feature, we can get an idea of what society believes and what it rejects. And High School Musical was huge. In 2022, it's hard to really picture just how popular it was. It was a complete phenomenon at the time, and nobody working on the original film could have known just how successful it would become. But with that success also came more scrutiny. Stars were thrust into mainstream popularity and put under a microscope, and that microscope had biases of its own. Disney is known for having a tight grip on their brand, and specifically the family-friendly values behind it. And with Disney Channel original movies, DCOMs, usually catapulting young teens to stardom in an era where fame was changing with the internet, they had to make the grip tighter to keep their stars in check. But they failed. Some Disney Channel stars had controversies regardless, and Disney's attempt to do damage control didn't just show the social values of the time, but a disturbing underbelly of a deeply flawed industry. More on that later. But you've seen the thumbnail for this video, and I'm sure you're wondering what this has to do with the American dream, let alone the death of it. Hang in there, I promise there's a point to that. High School Musical came at a very particular time, not only in Disney history, but also in US culture. And though at the beginning it seemed like the dawn of a new era, by the last movie, it also kind of became the end of an old one. I love the High School Musical series, but when the third one came out in 2008, I just thought it was okay. And since I've only loved it upon rewatching in my 20s, I've wondered why I used to think it was just okay. Why did I fall out of love with the series that I'd been so dedicated to? I know I was 13, and it's not uncommon for teens to distance themselves from the children's entertainment they once liked, but I was still a huge Disney fan, so I don't think it was that. The truth is, High School Musical 3 came out in 2008, just as I stopped believing in the American dream. And let me tell you how I got there. High School Musical premiered on the Disney Channel on January 20th, 2006. As a DCOM, it seemed poised for success. After all, Disney as a company was mainly known for their musicals, specifically the princess ones. So it seemed likely that a movie musical on the Disney Channel would also connect with audiences. And they had already been dipping their toes into the musical waters. In early 2002, a musical episode of the popular show Even Stevens premiered, and it had a great reception. In the episode titled Influenza the Musical, Ren is sick with the flu and decides to go to school anyway in fear of losing her perfect attendance record. After the day turns into a series of fever dream musical numbers and she fails a presentation, it's revealed that it was all a bad dream. The popularity of this episode was huge, and it was surprising given that Even Stevens was just a sitcom and had nothing to do with musicals. Breaking the format so drastically with a dream musical episode and having it be popular showed that audiences watching the Disney Channel were definitely willing to suspend their disbelief. So Disney kept going. When talking about the origin of High School Musical, many people jump straight to the 2004 musical episode of That's So Raven, which was basically the same experiment done again to make sure that Even Stevens' success was not a one-off thing. However, I think to jump right there misses a lot. The Cheetah Girls came out in 2003 and quickly gained a dedicated fan base. It was also the first musical DCOM and would come out at a time when Disney was experimenting with making Disney Channel stars into musical stars as well. This wasn't necessarily new. Stars like Annette Funicello from decades prior showed that Disney always knew the power in having multi-talented stars. If you were a good singer, you could not only have a musical number in a movie, but also sell records and have concert appearances in addition to an acting career. And by releasing the music of their stars on their own, Disney could have more control over it. So Disneyland Records was started in 1956. They previously just licensed out their music to other labels for releases. But with the new label, Disney could publish soundtracks, children's records, and even pop records from their stars. Disneyland Records would eventually become Walt Disney Records, and they'd even have spin-off labels like Hollywood Records. In the 80s and 90s, Disney was expanding their image by producing more mature movies under Touchstone Pictures, allowing them to publish R-rated films without tarnishing Disney's signature family-friendly brand. And Hollywood Records did a similar thing for music. Some of the artists signed to them featured profanity and heavier subjects that wouldn't fly under the family-friendly Disney brand. And this also allowed Disney to have a presence in the broader music scene. Even though their music is definitely family-friendly, this is where the Cheetah Girls come in. Originally created from the girl group 3LW, the Cheetah Girls were not only a fictional pop group in a DCOM, but also a real group that would release albums and compete for spots on the charts. And Disney had already been affiliating themselves with pop stars of the time, so there was once again a link being made between famous pop groups and Disney-approved ones. Also, keep in mind that at the time, Hollywood Records had also signed Hilary Duff, one of Disney's then most popular stars, and released her first album shortly after the Lizzie McGuire movie in 2003. So Disney was not only putting the musical format into DCOMs, they were also experimenting with reviving the Disney teen pop star. And given how it's a modern stereotype that every Disney star has a music career, I'm sure you already know that it was a huge success. After all this happened, Disney did the musical episode of That's So Raven, and after the success of that, it was clear that musicals were the way to go. So Disney began work on what would become High School Musical. I just remember Gary Marsh, president of the Disney Channel, coming up to me after High School Musical was a huge success. I remember seeing him. I remember exactly where it was. We were in a studio lot in Hollywood, in the parking lot, and I congratulated him on the success of High School Musical. And he said, "You know, we wouldn't have done that if you guys hadn't done that musical episode of Even Stevens. That gave us the confidence that musicals could work." And that was a really great compliment. When talking about High School Musical, many people rightly point out how similar the plot is to the 1970s hit Grease. Boy meets girl at a vacation destination. They later find out they go to the same school, and a complicated romance ensues that causes the characters to reevaluate their supposedly strict social hierarchies. The similarity was on purpose. That's because High School Musical was created from a 1999 script for Grease 3 that was set to star Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake. Kenny Ortega was recruited to direct the musical, having worked as a choreographer in film and music videos, in addition to directing the Disney movies Newsies and Hocus Pocus. He was a perfect fit for the job. Disney musicals have always had a sense of prestige and musical theater to them, but it wasn't until Howard Ashman and Alan Menken came along in the late 80s that they began to be more directly linked to the stage. There had been attempts before to bring the Disney musical to the stage, and there were movies ready for just that, but I'm referring to the modern-day link between the company and Broadway that didn't happen until Ashman and Menken completely changed things, because they not only completely revived the Disney musical, but forever cemented it as a staple of the company. Movies like Beauty and the Beast seem practically made for the stage. The way the numbers are written fits the format of musical theater to a T. When I listen to the opening number, it's no surprise to me that this movie was the first Disney animated feature to get a Broadway version. The way it introduces the main characters, conflict, and setting, while also having a general ensemble to support and drive the action, helps it translate easier to the stage than many earlier Disney animated films.
You call this baby? What hurt me?
Because of this precedent, it makes sense that when amping up the musical format for a DCOM, Kenny Ortega wanted to cast the film like a Broadway musical.
Over 600 boys and girls auditioned. The process for the actors, it was not like a traditional audition. They had to be able to act, they had to be able to sing, they had to be able to dance, and really bring forth an exciting and fun character.
We put the kids through a really long process. Agents would call casting directors saying, "What is going on? Why are you keeping them so long?" I was set on making sure these actors had all that it would take. So the project moved forward, originally called Untitled High School Musical Project. As you might guess, a better title was not found, so it was just shortened to High School Musical. The stars of the film, Zac Efron and Vanessa Hudgens, were relatively unknown when they were cast in the movie. They both had experience in television and film, but they were far from well known in the industry or at Disney. But not all of the cast was unknown. Ashley Tisdale, who plays Sharpay, was already on the hit Disney Channel show The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, which, after the popularity of High School Musical, led to a lot of cross-promotion on the channel.
Yeah, we're gonna pop, 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 pop to the top. And everyone says I look exactly like Sharpay.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't see it.
And Lucas Grabeel and Alicia Rulin, who play Ryan and Kelsey, respectively, had also worked together before on the DCOM Halloween Town High. One of the most interesting casting choices is Allison Reed, who plays Miss Darbus. She had a big background in musicals, having starred as Cassie in the film version of A Chorus Line. She also played Marilyn Monroe in a 1983 musical about the star, which was originally choreographed and directed by Kenny Ortega. The casting wasn't perfect, though. Zac Efron was definitely the leading role, but Drew Seeley also auditioned, and though he didn't get the part, he would end up doing Troy's singing voice outside of a few lines that Efron sings.
We're soaring, flying, you know the world can see us.
This wasn't mentioned by Disney though. At the beginning, only Efron was credited, but after the movie became so popular, it was clarified that Drew Seeley did Troy's singing voice. The main narrative as to why Efron didn't sing in the movie is that his voice back then wasn't strong enough. But the more likely answer is that the songs were written to be sung by a tenor and Efron was a baritone, so he had a slightly lower vocal range. This whole voice mix-up caused a funny situation, because while Zach was the most famous star from the High School Musical crew, the concert tour was happening, and some fans going may not have heard the news and were probably confused as to why there was a random man replacing Troy. That being said though, at that point, the fact that Drew Seeley voiced Troy was definitely one of the most well-known trivia pieces about the movie. The official reason as to why Zac was not on the tour was that he was off filming Hairspray. But anyway, Zac Efron ended up singing in the second and third movies, and the vocal parts are much lower. High School Musical 2 differs from the original in a crucial way. It gives you the singing voice of Zac Efron. That was a very huge point for me, Efron said. I had to put my foot down and fight to get my voice on these tracks. In the first movie, after everything was recorded, my voice was not on them. I was not really given an explanation. It kind of just happened that way. Unfortunately, it put me in an awkward position. It's not something I expected to be addressed. Then High School Musical blew up. Something really interesting about High School Musical as well is how the songs were written. At that point in Disney history, songs for cohesive musicals were usually written by songwriting duos. And looking back in Disney history, it's the songwriting duos that are remembered the most. But not all Disney musicals are like that. Oliver and Company had 12 people working on the movie's songs, and High School Musical does the same. The film's music was also written by 12 people, usually with dedicated songwriting teams taking on certain songs. Oh, and also, yes, that is the same Drew Seeley from before. He co-wrote Get Your Head in the Game. The amount of songwriters doesn't mean it's better or worse than movies that just have a single duo writing the music, but it is interesting to note with the High School Musical movies. As the films go on, you can see which songwriters are used for which types of songs and how they fit within the stories, but I'll talk more about that as we go through the films. Up until now, I've told you a lot about how High School Musical came to be, but let's go deeper into the story. As I mentioned earlier, it's essentially the 2000s version of Grease, but it's also so much more than that. The main characters, Troy and Gabriella, meet on vacation, specifically at a New Year's Eve party at some sort of ski lodge. And later, when Gabriella transfers to East High in Albuquerque, New Mexico, they find out that they actually go to the same school together. However, something's missing. Gabriella met Troy via a fun, unexpected moment of karaoke, but at East High, Troy has nothing to do with music. In fact, he's the school basketball star, and not only do people not know that he can sing, but he doesn't want them to know.
Why are you whispering?
My friends know about the snowboarding. I haven't quite told them about the singing. It's not what I do.
And of course, to express his frustration, there's an energetic and emotional musical number.
Why am I feeling so wrong? My head's in the game, my heart's in the song.
If it seems like there isn't much of a conflict between liking to sing and playing basketball, you're not viewing it from the right perspective. This film was made about US culture in 2006, and this was back when, in mainstream culture, gay was often used as a synonym for bad.
Do you like this top? So gay.
You really shouldn't say that.
Say what?
Well, say that something's gay when you mean it's bad. It's insulting.
And if you haven't been through the hell that is US American masculinity, I'm sorry to tell you that this was also the time when it was a running thing among adults and kids that if you were a boy or a man who sat down while peeing, that was also somehow gay? Sorry to everyone else for burdening you with this information. These things weren't unique to 2006, but we're just talking about the specific 2006 version of it. US masculinity, like many types of masculinity, isn't only just incredibly fragile, but also incredibly paranoid. It's not just about being threatened by things that are feminine, but also by things that might even have a suggestion of a little bit of femininity. So drinking fruity drinks and sitting down while peeing are on the list. And if you sing musical theater, something often associated with gay people, it must be because you're gay.
I will not allow my Twinkletown musicale to be made into farce.
Twinkletown?
See? I knew it!
At least, that's the logic this film runs on. Because Troy feels the pressure from his best friend, his team, and his father, who's also the coach of the basketball team. And you already know how I feel about his dad. I think he's super hot, but kind of in like a disturbing way. I feel like he said fat smash with fear. And with this storyline of singing versus basketball, High School Musical becomes a coming out story. The tension is between Troy being both supposedly masculine and feminine, and musical theater and basketball are two things he enjoys doing, but also things that can't seem to coexist. And so the movie becomes about expressing himself. The other plot points, like the romance with Gabriella and the rivalry with Sharpay and Ryan, are important, but learning to be yourself is at the center of the movie. So Troy ends up auditioning for the musical after Gabriella enters herself, despite the single auditions being over, putting pressure on him to be her partner. They were too late anyway, but after everyone leaves, the composer Kelsey shows them a slower, more intimate version of the same song that Sharpay and Ryan sang.
You want to hear how the duet's supposed to sound?
It's hard to believe I couldn't see you were always there beside me. It's hard to believe that I couldn't see you were always there beside me.
Troy and Gabriella sing it quite well, and it turns out Miss Darbus was listening.
Bolton, Montez, you have a callback.
Written by Andy Dodd and Adam Watts, what I've been looking for is not only a great song, but it's also a great look into something High School Musical does very well. You see, in musical theater, reprise is the term for when you repeat a song, often to highlight emotional development or some type of progression. Since High School Musical is mainly about people putting on a show, it makes sense that they would be working on songs more than once. So Sharpay and Ryan performing a more upbeat version of it, only for Kelsey to have Troy and Gabriella sing it the way she originally wrote it, does a few things. It shows us the flashy personalities of Sharpay and Ryan. It shows how they went against Kelsey's wishes to make an arrangement of the song that was so different from her intentions. And it gives a slow, romantic version of the song for Gabriella and Troy to sing, showing the strong chemistry between them. This is all accomplished by a single reprise, and I think moments like that really show you how tied the songwriting is to the plot. Because nobody knows that Troy sings, he's had to keep it a secret up until this point, but the callback sheet being posted reveals it to everyone. And when the school figures out that Troy is auditioning for the musical, it causes mass hysteria.
Callback!
Maybe we're being punked. Maybe we're being filmed right now. Maybe we'll get to meet Ashton.
What was previously a well-organized clique ecosystem is in shambles during the song Stick to the Status Quo. Once people see that you can be yourself in ways that deviate from what you're known for, they start being honest. Another basketball player admits that he likes to bake, a math girl comes out as a hip-hop dancer, and a skater reveals that he plays the cello. For the main antagonist, Sharpay, this is too much to handle. Her popular girl social status depends on the school running like business as usual. And if people are starting to think they can do things other than their assigned social roles, well, then they might start coming for her grip on the theater department, like Troy and Gabriella are doing by auditioning for the musical.
This is not what I want, this is not what I planned, and I just gotta say, I do not understand.
For some reason, this part of the song just has such a beautiful earnesty to it. In the middle of a dramatic ensemble number, the audience is brought to understand Sharpay's struggle somewhat. I think the movie frames it as like a villain's speech, with the staging of Sharpay looking down on everyone in a way that almost looks fascist. It pushes you to see her as a leader losing control. However, it's also a beautiful, vulnerable moment for a villain that shows her genuine confusion at what is going on. The whole point of her character is that she was spoiled and has gotten everything she's wanted her whole life. So being denied that causes her genuine stress. And when villains in Disney musicals usually have an unshakable amount of confidence, it's unique to see her look genuinely distressed and have a beautiful melody to go along with it. Of course, what makes her the villain is what she does after the audition. She gets Miss Darbus to make the callbacks at the same time as not only Troy's final basketball game, but also the scholastic decathlon that Gabriella is a part of. And before this happens, Troy and Gabriella's friends collaborate on a way to break up the couple by getting Troy to admit on camera that Gabriella isn't that important to him, and then live streaming that to her. There's a sad moment. It seems like they'll break up. Gabriella sings one of her dramatic and iconic ballads. They eventually make up, get back together, and then enlist their friends to help them disrupt both the basketball game and the decathlon so they can make the callback. Oh, also, while this is happening, Ryan and Sharpay are singing Bop to the Top. Troy and Gabriella are late, but a huge crowd shows up to see them, and so they get to sing their emotional duet, and everybody loves it. Breaking Free was written by Jamie Houston, and it's definitely one of the most emotional and notable songs in the entire franchise.
We're breaking free. There's not a star in heaven that we can breathe.
And within this song, I think, lies some of the elegance of High School Musical. The storyline is clearly targeted at kids and teens, but the language that the songs use feels very genuine and matches the emotional energy of what's happening in the story. Too often with children's media, the songs can be too simple or condescending in a way that doesn't feel relatable. But in this situation, the songs not only sound genuinely like something that could be written by a high schooler for a High School Musical, but they also sound like something that takes the feelings of teens seriously, while also being simple enough for young children to understand. And that's why I think High School Musical was such a success. Jamie Houston said in an interview that one of his goals when writing music for children's films is to not talk down to the kids. And I think that is one of the reasons why the songs he contributed to High School Musical were so successful. Instead of being cheap add-ons, they not only progress the story, but provide a serious outlet for kids and teens to express themselves and process emotion. And Breaking Free is a perfect example of that. I also really appreciate how the film never really reveals what the musical is. Sure, the title Twinkle, Towne and the 3 songs implied to be in the musical don't really make much sense. But I like the subversion of the cliche of characters putting on a show, or at least how it doesn't give us the final satisfaction of actually seeing the show. It leaves you with the pieces, and fans have been speculating ever since about Twinkletown. But anyway, back to the movie. They get huge applause, they get the roles for the musical, and the movie's over after another finale number in which everyone sings about how they're all in this together. And that's pretty much it for the first High School Musical. Of course, there are plenty of children's films that show audiences the value of being yourself, but this film does something different. While working on this video, I've basically been consuming High School Musical related content every free moment that I have, and I heard something really interesting on the This Ends at Prom podcast.
The major theming of sort of being who you are and doing what makes you happy, I think is so important, but what I think High School Musical does in such a profound way is that it also kind of gives you a small dose of the reality that it is not going to be easy, and that bucking the system and the status quo is really hard, and there are people that are going to be against you for no good reason other than you're not like me, therefore I don't like it.
Even your parents.
A lot of us have been raised and fed this messaging of like, do what you want and be who you are. But the reality is, like, shit is hard.
Having grown up in the US in the early 2000s, there was so much media and encouragement to be yourself no matter what. But it also felt like that only existed in theory. I was able to be the makeup designer for my school play in 5th grade, the year that High School Musical came out, but I was also ridiculed for it, for doing something feminine. The sort of toothless encouragement of be yourself felt insincere, when the same adults telling you that would also be the first to make you feel bad when you strayed too far from what they deemed to be okay.
Do you ever think about trying something new, but we're afraid of what your friends might think?
You mean like going left? You're doing fine. Come on.
High School Musical felt, and still feels, really relatable because of how much Troy struggles in a way that actually feels authentic. It's one thing to find yourself, but it's a whole other thing to actually be yourself. So the movie was unique. And when you combine the good message with wonderful songs, charismatic actors, and Disney Channel's already successful forays into musical TV episodes, it was clear it would be a success. However, nobody could have predicted what would happen next. When it came out, High School Musical was a phenomenon. It not only skyrocketed to be the most successful DCOM ever during its premiere, with 7.7 million viewers, but the lasting appeal stayed for a long time. Perhaps it was just because I was in the target audience, but once the film came out, I don't remember people talking about much else for the rest of 5th grade. It was nominated for and won some Emmys, and it was pretty critically acclaimed at the time. And of course, the stars associated with it also became celebrities in their own right. Zac Efron was a household name, and other stars began releasing music. And out of the 3 stars who released albums between the first and second movies, 2 of them were on Disney's subsidiary label, Hollywood Records. Ashley Tisdale was the exception, having signed with Warner Brothers. One of the most memorable things about growing up with the Disney Channel is how all-encompassing it was. In between programs, there were promos for other Disney shows, stars, music, and more. And even if you weren't watching TV, a lot of songs from Disney Channel stars would be playing on Radio Disney. Crossovers between shows were and are still a part of the channel, and one of the most recognizable parts of the Disney Channel is the wand bumper used to promote their stars and shows.
I'm Corbin Blue from High School Musical 3 senior year.
You're watching Disney Channel.
And of course, the movie itself would have reruns and even special events for slightly different versions of it. A notable example being the dance-along version of the movie, in which the actors taught you choreography. Another interesting special was High School Musical Around the World, a celebration that premiered on the movie's one-year anniversary and featured clips of the cast in London, alongside them talking about their favorite moments in the movie. Also, before the special premiered, so between 12 and 8 p.m., there were music videos featured of artists from around the world singing High School Musical songs in other languages.
I think the best thing to do with girls is just relax and be yourself. Because what happens is you start to like a girl and then you try and put on a show, and it's always so horrible, like it never works out. So just chill, be yourself.
High School Musical was everywhere. Even if you weren't watching the Disney Channel to see the movie, you probably would have still come in contact with it. Because when Disney had something that was a success, they put it everywhere. A notable example of this was also in the game Virtual Magic Kingdom. If you went to the US Disney parks, you could complete an in-person quest that would give you cards with codes on the back that you could use to unlock High School Musical related outfits, furniture, and guest rooms. And that's just one of the versions of High School Musical that showed up at the Disney parks. But we'll talk about that later because that's almost a category of its own. My point is that High School Musical had more exposure than any DCOM to come before it, and it was fully part of mainstream culture, not just restricted to the niche of those who watched the Disney Channel.
And the soundtrack to this movie was at one point the top-selling CD in this country. It's currently number 2, bumped out only by Prince.
So High School Musical, a movie that itself commented on US mainstream culture of the early 2000s, then became an important part of it. But let's talk about the American Dream. The American Dream is a loose phrase used to describe an ethos associated with the US. It really means a different thing for everyone, and these meanings have also changed a lot since the founding of the country. However, core ideals like democracy, rights, liberty, opportunity, and equality stay at the center of the American Dream. And though this ethos existed well before the term was coined by James Truslow Adams in 1931, since then, the American Dream has become a more tangible idea. Many people associate the US with those values I mentioned, but many also come to the US to have their own version of the American Dream, which at this point has become a defined concept of social mobility. The idea is that anyone can have anything and can start from the bottom and get to the top. And this philosophy of being able to live life to the fullest is something that's supposed to unite the whole country. But the American Dream isn't real. I'm sure that idea of social mobility has been genuinely true for many people in the country, but the idea that it is something that should unite people is a fallacy, because the way the US is currently set up, if someone gets to the top, them staying there requires someone to be on the bottom. And even if that person at the bottom moves up, someone else replaces them. And as the US has gone on, these categories of class have become more locked in. When health insurance is tied to employment and minimum wage doesn't match the actual cost of living, while people and companies over a certain financial status continue to get tax breaks, the American Dream only exists in theory. And when immigrating to the country is as embarrassingly difficult as it is, it's near impossible to even find the American Dream, let alone hold on to it. That's not even taking into account just the flawed principles of the country as a whole. The US was supposedly built on freedom, liberty, and democracy, but it was also built on the slave trade and genocide. And given that it's still a country where oppressed groups are fighting for their rights, respecting the founding fathers and what they supposedly stood for becomes just a thought exercise for those who don't have more important things to think about. I was learning about the American Dream when the first High School Musical came out. In a post-9/11 US, national identity was so important in mainstream culture, and the narrative was clear. Ideas like democracy, liberty, freedom, whatever, were not things that just happen in the world. They were specifically US American ideals. The reason I'm even talking about this is because a movie like High School Musical very much represents the American Dream. Cisgender, heterosexual people fall in love, everyone has a chance to be themselves, and anything is possible with enough work and dedication. And when I thought about what was important in life, what my goal was at 11 years old, I thought about Troy and Gabriella, the stereotypical teen romance, the comfortable living situations in big suburban homes, the life that had moments of butting heads with mainstream society, but was ultimately easy to fit right into it. The movie portrayed a version of US society that was not the reality for everyone, but because I grew up in a similar environment, I didn't notice it. And though I've seen many people share their disappointment about getting to high school and seeing that it was nothing like High School Musical, I actually had a slightly different experience. Sure, the spontaneous musical numbers and sets weren't there, but the school was huge and people definitely stuck to the status quo. My graduating class was over 700 people, and the huge hall where we ate lunch was remarkably similar to the one in the movie, down to the ecosystem of cliques. I grew up in the US, but I live in Germany now, so when people ask me what public high school was like in the States, I usually reference High School Musical, because for some reason, that clique-focused, weird ecosystem of students was still at play where I went to school. It was obviously not as dramatic, but there was a hierarchy. I'll never forget being told, "Get out of my seat, f***it," and sometimes I did eat lunch in a bathroom stall because of anxiety. But anyway, back to when the movie aired and I was in 5th grade. While I think I knew what being gay was because of jokes on TV and stuff, I didn't even think about that being a possibility for me. I think I was just running on autopilot with the script I was given. People talked about girls and romance and stuff like that, but it would take me many, many years from then to realize that my attraction was mainly to more masculine older men. And because of that, it took me a long time to even understand what attraction was, let alone that I was gay. And now I'm a straight trans woman, but that didn't come until my mid-20s. And a lot of my struggle with identity in my teen years was about being gay. So I'll just talk about it like that for simplicity's sake. Zac Efron was such a teen heartthrob, along with pop stars like Justin Bieber, that I didn't even think I was gay because I wasn't into them. My first crush was Santa Claus, and in terms of actors, when I actually realized I was gay, it was because of people like Paul Giamatti and John Goodman. So my gayness definitely strayed from the narrative of 2000s mainstream twink queerness. But this didn't really factor into the first High School Musical, because there wasn't a gay character in the movie. Or maybe there was. Ryan Evans, Sharpay's brother, is usually who people point to when talking about gayness in High School Musical. And they're not wrong. The character was explicitly intended to be gay, even if it's not stated in the movie. The director and choreographer Kenny Ortega, himself an openly gay man, has said that Ryan is gay and would have come out in college. It was less about coming out and just more about letting his true colors come forward, Ortega says, noting that he didn't think at the time that he could have had an openly gay character on Disney Channel. And Disney is the most progressive group of people I've ever worked with, he adds. I was concerned because it was family and kids that Disney might not be ready to cross that line and move into that territory yet. So I just took it upon myself to make choices that I felt that those who were watching would grab. They would see it, they would feel it, they would know it, and they would identify with it. And that is what happened. It's possible to view Ryan within stereotypes, for example, his flamboyant sense of style and his involvement in musical theater. But perhaps the most glaring thing is just that he isn't paired with anyone romantically. In a franchise where most characters are aggressively paired off with some opposite gender character, Ryan not having a romantic interest in the first movie certainly suggests his gayness. This character exists in this queer-coded no man's land, where gay people growing up could watch the movie and feel represented by the character, but Disney wouldn't have to deal with the repercussions of having a gay character in a children's film in 2006. So there is a gay character in this movie, but there also isn't. Ryan would change with the stage show. As I mentioned before, High School Musical was so ridiculously successful that Disney was trying to make as much off of it as they could. And for a movie about staging a musical, it made sense that it would then be turned into a show itself. So they enlisted playwright David Simpatico to make a book for a stage version of the movie that would start performances around the US in early 2007, and quickly became a staple in theater programs around the country. It would also go on an official Disney tour in May 2007, just before the second movie came out. Also, this version has all the songs from the original movie, but also some new ones. One of the highlights is Cellular Fusion, which replaces the scene where the characters read the callback sheet, and the school learns about Troy and Gabriella through a series of phone calls.
Gabriella, girl, don't you care? You're on the team. Is this some kind of sick joke? Troy and Gabriella didn't even audition. And rule number 5, stick to the status quo.
You were so totally awesome.
Also, in the version of the stage show that went on tour, Ryan Evans was canonically gay. While the other guy characters in the show had photos of women in their lockers, Ryan had photos of men in his. And perhaps even more notable, there was a moment where Troy brushed past Ryan and he swooned in response. In an interview with Logo, David Simpatico, also an openly gay man, talked about how he handled Ryan's character in the stage adaptation. In the movie, the character has a gay tint, But in the stage version, I wanted to more fully articulate that tint and say, hey, this kid is who he is. Yes, I consider him a young gay guy without ever having to say it. I'd rather say it with behavior and action. And we do. He also made Ryan the hero of the story instead of Kelsey, having him be the one who tells Troy and Gabriella about Sharpay's plan to sabotage them. I'm proud of the fact that in this Disney show, there's a strong gay character who actually becomes the hero of the piece, and he provides representation for high school kids who might be gay or confused or bullied for being a theater guy. I love that there is a character in this show that I would have loved when I was in high school. I think it's great that Ryan's gayness was directly established in the stage show, even if it isn't said out loud. And when I was growing up, it was nice to see a character just be himself. In a way, it being not really acknowledged showed me that being more effeminate was totally okay. But looking back, I can also understand Ryan as sort of lackluster representation. Gay characters shouldn't always have to say it out loud, but considering at the time that Disney had never had an openly gay character before, and Kenny Ortega said that he didn't think Disney was ready for it, it feels like less of an artistic decision and more like only doing what was possible at the time within an environment that wasn't fully accepting of queerness. Though the touring stage version hinted at it more directly, and there was that interview from around that time confirming it, most people didn't know that Ryan was gay until Kenny Ortega said so in 2020. So just like a lot of Disney representation up until recently, it's there in a way that's barely noticeable. Compared to more modern representation, it seems like not enough. But I think it would be too easy to label Ryan as a cop-out, because I don't think he necessarily is. And when looking at this character, we should contextualize him within the history of queercoding. I know I've talked about this many times before on the channel, but I'm just going to give a quick rundown for those who haven't seen my videos before. Queercoding is a practice of imbuing gay or queer aesthetics or behaviors onto certain characters. It's mainly associated with the Hays Code, a set of guidelines from the early 1930s US that influenced which morals could be shown on screen. Because it prohibited any type of perversion from being depicted, and queerness was unfortunately included in that, gay characters weren't explicitly stated as such. Instead, they were more subtle. This could be used in a variety of situations, but one of the prevailing trends that still exists decades after the Hays Code was gone is queer-coded villains. The Hays Code allowed flexibility if the character portraying a so-called perversion was evil and or was punished. So that's where the archetype of a queer-coded villain comes from. Queercoding in Disney films began as distasteful jokes. You have Dan Cupid from Who Killed Cock Robin being referred to as a homophobic slur in the treatment for the film. And you also have the Reluctant Dragon, who's basically a gay joke and was disliked during production by conservatives at the studio who thought the dragon sounded too gay. And then of course you have villains like Captain Hook, who seems to represent stereotypes about gay men being effeminate and predatory. So people mainly associate queercoding with villainy and jokes, and because of this, view it as an inherently negative practice. However, in the 80s, there began a new trend at Disney of openly gay employees coding gay characters. Now, this was a time in which there were openly gay characters in pop culture, but Disney's tie to conservative politics and values made it so there was virtually no chance for an actual gay character to break through. And that background is still something they're untangling to this day. But a lot of queer culture in the 20th century was specifically made by people claiming their own representation regardless. I mean, that's why there are so many movies that are considered queer classics without having any queer people in them. And for gay employees working at Disney, queercoding in the 80s and 90s had a different political context than it had before. So we have characters like Ursula and Gaston, who were specifically coded by gay artists and helped bring some form of representation of gay aesthetics into Disney films, in a way that kind of reclaimed an old homophobic trope, and those characters have become staples in the queer community. I'm not saying that's the same thing as openly gay representation, but it is different than what had happened in past decades. And of course, there are also the Sanderson sisters from 1993's Hocus Pocus, which was directed by Kenny Ortega, and when talking about the film, he said that he considered the witches to be almost drag queens and encouraged the actresses to go there, which definitely makes sense when you look at their style, makeup, and personalities that play with gender in a very drag way. But why would Kenny Ortega still be queer-coding characters in 2006? To know why, we have to understand who he is and where he's coming from. Kenny Ortega was born on April 18, 1950, in Palo Alto, California. From a young age, he was involved in theater, and in his early career was involved with touring productions of shows like Oliver and Hair. The latter is particularly significant because of what it represented at the time. Though Hair is a canon musical theater staple now, at the time it caused a lot of controversy in the US due to its portrayal of counterculture issues, racism, drug use, and sexuality. In the book Rebels with Applause, Broadway's groundbreaking musicals, Scott Miller describes what the show represented. The youth of America, especially those on college campuses, started protesting all the things they saw wrong with America: racism, environmental destruction, poverty, sexism and sexual repression, violence at home and the war in Vietnam, depersonalization from new technologies, and corruption in politics. And before he himself was out as gay, Kenny Ortega played George Berger, a character who was bisexual. His appearance and hair was formative, but not in the way that you might think. They didn't want us in Florida. They didn't want us in Oklahoma. In Tulsa, where the KKK jumped on the stage, we were being chased and picked out of restaurants and discriminated against and being threatened. There was fear about what this show talked about and sang about. I played a character that was bisexual, and this chief of police did not like what I stood for and did not like that we were there, and he planted enough narcotics in my hotel room to make me out to be a major drug dealer, and I was arrested and facing 25 years to life. It was at the top of Variety. Hair actor arrested on drug charges. It was right on the front page, and I spent weeks in jail and thousands of dollars for representation. Allegedly, the officer targeted Ortega because during a performance of the show, he kissed him on the head and called him mother during a part of the show where the performers interacted with the audience. In response, the officer decked Ortega and the actor fell out of his chair, after which the show was briefly stopped before resuming. Then a few days later, Ortega was mysteriously framed after the group's final performance. What was so beautiful was that the judge, she came to see the final performance. Her daughters had seen the show multiple times, and when she saw the show and heard about what happened to me, she thought something was up, and she did some digging. And first of all, he arrested me under the name of George Berger. He thought that's who I was because we broke the fourth wall. People came forward and basically sort of threw him under the bus and said, yeah, he told us to do this and asked us to do that. And we put this in Kenny's room and that in Kenny's room. The entire thing was just, it was unbelievable. It was a horror story that just had this incredible bright ending, and that the whole thing was thrown out of court. He was removed from office. I was set free, but never to be the same. Having to face discrimination and potential jail time for essentially just performing in a show that went against the status quo clearly had an effect on Ortega, who was only in his early 20s. He wasn't out yet, but months later, when he was offered an opportunity with The Advocate, a lesbian and gay periodical who were looking for actors to come out in a new issue about the industry, he did it and never looked back. You also have to keep in mind that this was in the early 70s. A lot of the things talked about in Hair were still happening, and extreme discrimination was a stark reality for queer people in the US. Sure, there were many queer people in the entertainment industry, but often they were not the ones making the budgeting decisions and financing projects. By coming out, he risked future employment, but he kept going. Later on, he would get a job as a choreographer for the band The Tubes after they discovered him on a club dance floor. But possibly one of his most notable opportunities came when he was hired to work on Gene Kelly's 1980 movie Xanadu, where he learned a lot from arguably one of the most famous stars of the 20th century. Gene Kelly changed my life. He enlightened me about the importance of learning where to put the camera as a filmmaker when you're choreographing, about designing choreography for the camera. When you look at the work that Kenny Ortega did with High School Musical, it's clear to see where that principle came up in his work. For example, Get Your Head in the Game works entirely different on film than it would on stage. In fact, the camera angles are essential for communicating just how much pressure Troy is under. And when he choreographs around the camera work, he can do things only possible in film and also communicate the emotional longing much better. I also want to shout out the other two choreographers who worked with Ortega on the High School Musical trilogy. But anyway, Kenny Ortega became a well-known figure in the industry, and I actually made a whole video a while ago looking at the entirety of his career, but I'll skip around to highlight the things that I think are important when talking about High School Musical. In the 80s, he also began directing music videos. Possibly his most iconic music video is Madonna's Material Girl, itself a reference to Marilyn Monroe's Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. With this video, he also plays around heavily with just a general queer aesthetic. The music video is camp, with the seemingly serious heterosexual premise clashing with the overdramatic choreography and the seemingly queer-coded aesthetics. And given that Madonna had a very dedicated queer fan base at the time, these choices make sense. Do you think there's a queer aesthetic that runs through all your movies? Yeah, for sure. I do, because that's who I am. I put a lot of who I am into my work. I mean, really, all the way back from the earliest work that I've done, even as a choreographer in film and television. And I think, yeah, that is just there. And whether it's screaming at you or whether it's just sort of quietly there, it's there. His first projects with Disney would be Newsies in 1992, and then Hocus Pocus in 93. And these were also the first feature-length movies he directed. Both films have a presence in the queer community, but Hocus Pocus especially so, with the Sanderson sisters becoming staples at drag shows and on Halloween. And like I said earlier, he considers the characters to be like drag queens. I think it's impossible to talk about High School Musical without bringing up Kenny Ortega's queer influence. And when looking at the character of Ryan, maybe it's best not to see him as a shallow stereotype, but an earnest tribute to the type of person that Kenny would have liked to see when growing up himself. And as I mentioned, David Simpatico also said that he loved that there was a character he would have loved when he was in high school. There is always room to move forward, and I'm glad that today there are more openly queer characters who don't have to say it out loud, but also can. But the history of queer representation is complicated, and I think it's too easy to think of it just as a linear progression from bad to good. It changes over time, and some representation might work for some people, but not others. We shouldn't let what worked in the past define what we do today. But if we don't remember the history and all the nuance that comes with it, we forget about those who got us to where we are now. In a 2020 interview, Lucas Grabeel, himself cisgender and straight, said that he didn't know if he would play Ryan if offered the role today.
There's so many amazingly talented gay actors that could do it as well. If High School Musical was made today, I don't know if I would play Ryan. I would love to, but the last thing that I want to do is take an opportunity away from other people. And as a straight white man, I know that even without trying, I've taken opportunities away from people.
This only amplifies everything we've learned so far about the character. A good number of people working on High School Musical considered the character to be gay, but the only thing missing was him actually explicitly stating it in the movie. The character of Ryan only gets more interesting throughout the rest of the franchise, and the way he changes not only shows how the canonically gay character is treated, but also how he fits within the American dream that the franchise portrays. But before we can talk about the sequels, we have to talk about High School Musical, the concert. As you might guess, this was a concert with music from the film. That was another way for Disney to make money off of the pure phenomenon that was High School Musical. And as you might also guess, it was a huge success, and people filled stadiums to go see the cast perform songs from the movie, with 46 shows in North America and 10 in Latin America. And this was the era of the Disney Channel star, so Disney already had experience with putting their stars on stage. In fact, the summer after the first High School Musical film came out, the Cheetah Girls 2 came out, which was also directed by Ortega. And by that point, the Cheetah Girls were already a touring group of their own, so Disney Channel stars going on tour to promote their music, shows, and movies was not unheard of. And of course, we can't forget Hannah Montana, another Disney Channel hit show that would also become a global phenomenon. It was truly the golden age of the Disney Channel. So, High School Musical went on tour, and since 3 of the stars released albums between the first and second films, with 2 of them being on Disney's Hollywood Records, the concert tour wasn't just to promote the movie, but also their solo albums. Each set had mostly songs from the movie, but then random Ashley Tisdale, Vanessa Hudgens, and Corbin Bleu songs. Drew Seeley was also on the tour instead of Zac Efron, and his additional song was Dance With Me from the Cheetah Girls 2. The concert was eventually released as a DVD and also a live album, and honestly, I listened to it a lot. The version of Stick to the Status Quo is just legendary. And there was also the notable inclusion of I Can't Take My Eyes Off of You, a song that was originally on the soundtrack for the first movie. It was later used in the stage adaptation as a romantic song between Troy and Gabriella, but it seems like it was originally intended to be in the movie, but with a different purpose. On the soundtrack and at the concert, it was sung by Troy and Gabriella, but also Sharpay and Ryan. This makes me think that it was a song for the callback scene, as a sing-off or something. So, if you are wondering how you've gotten this far into a video about High School Musical, and we haven't even gotten to the second movie, Bitch, me too. This has really become a big project. But I thought we would have a little intermission. I'm taking a note from the great Quentin Reviews. If you are not familiar with his videos on iCarly and Victorious and Sam and Cat, I highly recommend you check them out. So I thought it'd be nice to have an intermission because when talking about the High School Musical franchise, there are so many things that I would have liked to include, but just didn't really make sense with just the analysis and the themes that I was looking at. And so I thought I could just go over some of the anomalies and stuff like that. We also got some food here. I thought, why not just eat some food while chatting to y'all about High School Musical? And because this is a video about the death of the American dream, I thought we would have some fitting food. But first, I will pour some blood orange juice. We got the Reva Festival. And here's a little language lesson for y'all. In German, pulp is fruit meat. So I got some Blutorangensaft mit Fruchtfleisch. So pulp, fruit meat. That's so much fun. Let's pour some. I thought I would get blood orange juice because of the Wildcats. I mean, we need something red, right? Oh, by the way, something I didn't mention earlier is that from this point on, I'm just gonna refer to Troy and like his group of friends as the Wildcats because that's kind of how they're referred to, but I just didn't really clarify that up until this point. So yeah, we got some blood orange juice for the Wildcats. I thought in a video about the American dream, about the death of the American dream, I would eat some not American food. So we got some German Oblaten Lebkuchen. Lebkuchen is a type of like dessert around like Christmas time. But these ones are interesting because Oblaten is like on a wafer, kind of like a honey cake, kind of like gingerbread, and it's covered in chocolate. So this is super tasty, and it's one of my favorite things to get at the supermarkets around Christmas. So I was also just at the supermarket getting stuff for this video, and this was in the bakery case, and it was called Donut Texas. So I don't know what the f that's about, but we're about to find out. So it's just a donut, but it has apple filling on the inside. So that's the secret. Donut Texas. It has apple filling. I also thought that no video talking about growing up in the early 2000s US would be complete without these guys, these little shits. The smiley like potatoes. When I saw these at Reva, I lost my shit. I have not seen these since elementary school. So since High School Musical 1 came out, like in 2006. They're just so good. And also just some more German fun. On this, it says smiles, and below that it says listig geformte Kartoffelgesichter, which means funny molded potato faces. Now that I have all my food and all my US American food and all my not US American food and also the in-between, the Donut Texas, I think we can talk about High School Musical now. Something I find really interesting about Vanessa Hudgens' solo career is that she has an album from 2008 called Identified. And the first song on it is called Last Night, and it's in 5/4. So quick explanation for those who do not know what that means. In pop music and stuff, typically it's divided into like groups of 4 or groups of 3. So you count like 1, 2, 3, 4, or you count like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But 5/4 basically means that you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's not really something that you hear that often on like pop music, and I love that. And in fact, actually, this song is the first and only song that I'm aware of in the entire history of the Disney company where a song is in 5/4. So if anyone knows anything else, any other song from Disney that's in 5/4, let me know. But as far as I know, and I like to think I know something about Disney music, I can't think of any. And I'm not talking scores, I'm talking like pop songs. So if you know of anything, just like let me know. Yeah, that being said, that's one thing that I find very interesting. Also, another thing, I was talking earlier about the High School Musical concert tour. You should also know that they had High School Musical on ice. And like the concert tour, it did not just play in the US, like there were also shows in Europe. Here's a poster from a show in Poland. That's super interesting, but you and I both know that if I were to talk about every single piece of merch, every single show relating to High School Musical, this video would be much longer than it already is. And I'm trying to make this as concise as possible. Another thing is that earlier I was talking about how the high school in the movie was quite realistic to my experience going to public high school in the US. And I'm sure that a lot of people saw that part of the video and were kind of curious as to why I did not address the auto shop in the middle of the high school. Because when talking about the realistic nature of the high school and whether or not it's realistic to begin with, a lot of people address the fact that, yeah, Troy literally walks through an auto shop in that scene where he's running away from Chad. Though there was not an auto shop at my high school, I know many people who grew up in towns where there was an auto shop at their high school. So I don't really think it's that far-fetched. Okay, so the main reason why I wanted to have an intermission is to talk about Twinkle Towne, which is the musical that they're putting on in the movie. So when they're auditioning for the callbacks and whatever, they're auditioning as the roles of Arnold and Minnie, two characters from Twinkle Town. We don't know much about Twinkle Town, other than the fact that it's a show that was written by Kelsey. We know that Arnold and Minnie are the two main characters, but there's also a character called the Incredible Mr. Shane. There was also a character named Johnny, but I can't really make out the last name. And in the show, there are 3 numbers that we know of. So there's What I've Been Looking For. We don't really know which arrangement that is, but I think it would be the Kelsey one, because I think the Ryan and Sharpay version, the sort of bouncy arrangement they had the rehearsal pianist make, I think that was just for the audition. So we know that there's What I've Been Looking For, we know that there's Bop to the Top, and we know that there is Breaking Free. Somebody on Twitter pointed out to me that they think that Bop to the Top was just an audition song from Ryan and Sharpay, but I don't really agree with that, because when Miss Darbus accepts Troy and Gabriella for the callbacks, she says give them the song from the second act, which I feel like would imply that the songs being performed at the callbacks are songs from the show. But that really throws a wrench into whatever the Twinkle Town is about. Something that a lot of people don't really mention when talking about what Twinkle Town might be is that there's also the song I Can't Take My Eyes Off of You, which I just talked about with regards to the concert tour. But as I said, I think it was intended for the callbacks because Sharpay, Ryan, Troy, and Gabriella all sing on it. And the song is like a love song, and they're certainly not singing to each other or like in a sort of love square type situation. So that makes me think that each pair would then switch off during the song. So in my opinion, I think we can consider I Can't Take My Eyes Off of You as also being a part of Twinkle Town. So there are plenty of fan theories about what Twinkle Town is really about. Bottom line is that we don't really know, but a lot of fan theories. The most notable being this one Reddit post where somebody says the musical Twinkle Town is about a young couple becoming kingpins, going on the run from the law and committing suicide. I'm gonna take a wild guess and say that is not true. I do not understand why they would be performing a show like that at a literal high school. I admire the ambition, love the energy, but I'm gonna strike that off the list. I asked y'all what you thought Twinkle Town was about, and we did get some interesting responses. Before I go into that though, we have the 4 songs. I just wanna set up where they are in the show. Because What I've Been Looking For is kind of a love song, and it really does sound like something that would happen at the beginning of a show to describe 2 characters meeting for the first time, because the lyrics are about how they didn't know that they were there. I think it would be in the first act. And we do know that Breaking Free is in the second act. And if we are to understand that the callbacks also had another song from the second act, then Bop to the Top would also be in that. So that being said, what's the storyline? Some people commented about how they think it's set in Hollywood or it's some sort of competition, because Bop to the Top definitely has 2 characters like more so competing with each other than having any sort of chemistry. It's a sci-fi dystopian meets up-and-coming starlet, Hallmark / meet cute / star-crossed lovers musical. So much like 1984, Blade Runner, or The Hunger Games, except they break out into song and it's GPG rated because it's Disney. I love that. And also, this one really got me. I just have to read this. Allegory for homosexuality in a conservative town where the gray town becomes sparkly after a 3-act musical and accepting of all level of brightness, and all thanks to a twink called Towne. A twink called Towne. I think that's beautiful. Honestly, we're gonna talk later about Kelsey and like what's the deal with her. But if she wrote a show where a twink called Towne saves the day, also Towne with an E at the end, we're working off of that. That would be amazing. I would love that. But let's bring it back to reality. I found something really interesting. So I did not mention this earlier in the video, but in the High School Musical on stage version, they don't do Twinkle Town as the show. And if you performed in High School Musical in your elementary school or high school or whatever, you already know this, because in the show, they do Romeo and Juliet, and not just Romeo and Juliet, but they specify, I believe Miss Darbus says it's a neo-feminist version, a neo-feminist twist on Romeo and Juliet. So first off, no notes. I love that. It's beautiful, amazing. But it does probably give us a glimpse into what Twinkle Town might be. If it was adapted into Romeo and Juliet in the stage show, that suggests to me that the show as it exists in the High School Musical universe might be analogous to Romeo and Juliet in some way. It could be like a modern adaptation of it. I'm not exactly sure. What do y'all think? I really want y'all to go to the comments and let me know exactly what you think Twinkle Town is about, because there are so many possibilities, and yeah, we don't have anything canon yet. Oh, also, after recording this, I actually got a response from David Simpatico about why he changed it from Twinkle Town to Romeo and Juliet in the stage version. I believe the name of the school musical, Twinkle Town, is probably a reference to some form of theatrical setting, like Broadway and the Twinkle twinkling lights they're in. There was never any official discussion about the title. The stock ultra-femme vibe of that phrase stands in direct opposition to the hypermasculine world of the coach and his basketball players, which is good as far as that goes. But I wanted to take it further. I wanted to buoy up the theatrical side of the argument and give serious credence and playful consideration to what the show might be, in a way that reflects and amplifies a central Romeo and Juliet theme. So, Juliet and Romeo flips the order and focus of the characters, and I hope lends some tiny credence to the wonderful work being done by the high school drama departments. I wanted to suggest that feminism and creative expression were alive and flourishing in our high school drama departments. So that's great to know. And David, if you're watching this, thank you so much for responding. I also wanted to ask, do y'all enjoy this long video format? It's definitely new for me. I've never made a video this long, clearly. I spend most of my time making these videos now, and I have a Patreon where you can sign up on a monthly basis. I like doing these long videos, but it does take a lot of time. I've been working a lot to finish this video. If we can get to 200 patrons, I will make a video about the Cheetah Girls, which is another area of focus, another area of study that I am very familiar with. So if you want to see me make a long deep dive about the Cheetah Girls, definitely sign up for the Patreon. If we can get to 200 patrons, I will do that. Anyway, let's get back to High School Musical, because we still have a long way to go. Not even a year after the first movie came out, Disney was already hyping up the next one, which was slated to premiere in August 2007. One of the most interesting things about the lead up to High School Musical 2 was that Disney Channel hosted some polls to let fans determine certain aspects of the movie. And to be honest, it sounds more exciting than it really was. No significant part of the film was influenced by the polls, and it was basically just about little details and props. For example, fans could weigh in on what type of sandwich they wanted Troy and Gabriella to eat at a picnic, what Chad's shirt says at the beginning of the film, and which animal would be the mascot of the fictional college trying to scout Troy. However, there was a poll that was exciting. Specifically, which Hannah Montana star would be in the film. For some reason, I totally remember it not being limited to Hannah Montana. I remember as a child voting for the Jonas Brothers to be in the film. But that might be a false memory or something, as I could find no evidence of that while researching. But I remember this particular category being hyped up. After all, what kid watching the Disney Channel at the time wouldn't want a crossover between Hannah Montana and High School Musical, the channel's two biggest properties? In retrospect, though, the question seems like leading the witness. When I remembered it as just being about Disney Channel stars in general, it made more sense. But when it's restricted to Hannah Montana stars, why would you vote for anyone else than Miley, the lead in the show? So of course she won, and it's kind of funny that the question was even asked. So the cameo was hyped up, and everyone was so curious as to what it would be. So imagine my surprise at 12 years old, when after finishing the movie, I realized I didn't even see Miley in it. It wouldn't be until later on YouTube that I was able to actually watch the final scene of the movie and realize that, oh, there she is, in a literal blink and you'll miss it thing. I guess I just blinked. But anyway, picture this. It's August 17th, 2007. The day is finally here. High School Musical 2 is coming out. You get your friends and your siblings together, your parents make some popcorn and bring a snack tray with candy on it. Life is good. And because it's the Disney Channel in 2007, you know that there's plenty of hype before the movie. So you turn on the TV for the High School Musical 2 premiere party, which features the cast at Kenny Ortega's house hyping it up. Often cited by fans as the best of the trilogy, High School Musical 2 takes place the summer after the first movie, and it follows Troy, Gabriella, and their friends as they spend the school break working at a country club. And honestly, it's my favorite one too. There's something so special about it, a sort of confidence that carries it. Everyone involved was obviously still riding the high of the success of the first one, and it totally shows. All of the characters have so much charisma, the songs are incredible, and especially with regards to Kenny Ortega's directing and the choreography in general, it's just so ridiculously fun. If I were to show someone just one of the movies in the trilogy, I would absolutely pick the second. So anyway, High School Musical 2 opens with the last day of school. They sing a wonderful song about summer and then talk to each other about what they'll be doing over break. Sharpay's villain plot in this movie is to steal Troy from Gabriella, and she seems convinced it will happen if she's able to isolate him.
Troy, Sharpay, Troy. It just makes sense.
Evidently not to Troy.
But it's summer, Rye. Everything changes.
So she gets Troy invited to work at the country club that her parents own, telling the manager to get Troy no matter what the cost. However, this plan backfires when it turns out that actually meant that Troy would only do the job if they gave jobs to the other Wildcats as well. Sharpay is happy to see Troy, but so shocked to see Gabriella as the lifeguard that she fake drowns to get attention. Oh, also, in the scene where Sharpay and Ryan are arriving at the Lava Springs Country Club, the song playing on the radio is You Got It by Lucas Grabeel. It's never actually credited in the movie or on the soundtrack, but it's a really interesting piece of music from that time that wasn't really pushed by Disney that much, aside from this brief cameo in the movie.
Yeah, you got it so good, make this dance for us.
Just before Sharpay sees Troy, though, she sings what's probably my favorite song in the entire franchise, Fabulous. Written by David Lawrence and Faye Greenberg, the song sees Sharpay flexing her wealth, singing about all of the luxurious things she wants.
Iced tea imported from England, lifeguards imported from Spain, towels imported from Turkey, turkey imported from Maine.
Not only is the song just incredibly well written, and Ashley Tisdale gives such a wonderful performance, but this is one of the numbers where you can really see High School Musical pulling all the stops. And from a queer perspective, I just love Sharpay as this bitchy, campy villain in general, but there's something so iconic about this scene. When I was growing up, I would run around the house singing along to this song, pretending I was Sharpay.
Everything's got to be perfect for me. She wants fabulous.
This scene is also just so Kenny Ortega. Remember when I talked about Get Your Head in the Game and how it relates to what he learned from Gene Kelly? Well, I think Fabulous is similar. What looks like a visual nod to Busby Berkeley is explored more with the moving camera, and the choreography in general is just paired so well with the cinematography. These are the types of things that can only be achieved in film by someone who really knows what they're doing. And that's kind of the wonderful thing about this movie and just the core High School Musical trilogy. Sure, it's a decom from a specific time, and as a result, it's not going to be an Oscar-winning film or something that redefines the art of cinema, but it's not trying to be that. And if you look at it within this lens of teen entertainment from the early 2000s, you'll see that not only were these movies some of the best in that art form, but they were also constructed by a group of people at the top of their game. There was just the perfect mix of talented newcomers like Zac Efron, Corbin Bleu, and Ashley Tisdale alongside seasoned veterans like Kenny Ortega. There was a sort of energy about these films that I still think holds up today. Even though I'm sure a lot of my love for these movies comes from the fact that I grew up with them, I feel like I'd still enjoy them even if that weren't the case. Just like the decom musicals that came after my time that I enjoy today. So Fabulous stands out not just as my favorite number in the franchise, but also one of my favorite songs from the Disney Channel, period. And of course, it ends with Sharpay seeing Troy arrive, noticing that Gabriella is there too, and then pretending to drown for attention. True girl boss behavior. Sharpay tries to get the Wildcats fired, but Fulton, the manager of the country club, says that her parents are totally fine with it. Another part of this plot is that every year, Sharpay and Ryan have won the Star Dazzle Awards, the annual talent show at the club. Her mom says it's a good thing that her friends are there, but Sharpay is not having it. So she goes back to Fulton and tells him that if he can't fire them, he should make them want to quit. This is where the plot really starts to begin, as Fulton starts putting pressure on the Wildcats and makes it clear that working at the country club will be a very strict environment. They sing another song about how they wanted to work out and keep going. Kelsey, the composer from the first movie, is also at the country club as the in-house pianist, and it turns out that she wrote a song for Troy and Gabriella to sing, which brings us to the incredibly beautiful You Are the Music in Me, also written by Jamie Houston, the guy who wrote Breaking Free.
Na 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 na, na 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 na, yeah, you are the music in me.
This is another one of my favorite songs in the whole franchise. It's such a beautiful admission of love, and I really like how it builds up and tells the story. Troy doesn't want to sing, but Gabriella wants to hear Kelsey's song, so she begins, then Gabriella joins, and then eventually Troy reluctantly starts before getting really into it.
When I hear my favorite song, I know that we belong. You are the music in me.
This song says a lot about the characters, and it also highlights the core theme of the franchise. Troy clearly enjoys singing, but has a lot of reservations about how it will affect his reputation. But as he lets himself enjoy it, he gets more confident, and the social boundaries don't affect him as much. And not only that, but once he allows himself to be himself, it brings him closer to Gabriella. They are connected through music. In terms of which songwriters are used for which type of song, it's clear that Jamie Houston is fantastic at writing emotional ballads, and this song is no different. And like many good High School Musical songs, this one gets drastically changed with a reprise, but we'll get to that later. So Troy decides to sign up for the talent show with the other Wildcats. But he doesn't know that once Sharpay hears about this, she starts a plan to get him to sing with her instead. Later on, Troy and Chad are offered good pay to caddy for the Evans family, so they accept, and Sharpay ends up telling her dad about Troy's accomplishments. She clearly has a plan of pressuring Troy into dating her, and since her dad has so many connections, Troy has an incentive to play along. So Troy is getting in with Sharpay's family, and it seems like they're helping him get a scholarship. But this is coming at the price of potentially losing his friends. Troy goes out to dinner with the family, but is literally being waited on by his friends. This brings up an important theme, because while all High School Musical films involve class in some way, a big part of Troy's plotline in this movie is about class struggle. Troy has the opportunity to get a scholarship by sucking up to Sharpay's family because his family is struggling to save for college and he needs help. But this clearly comes at the cost of leaving his friends behind. This is a story that could definitely happen in other places, but it's a very strong storyline within the context of US culture. US college tuitions are so expensive that if you want to go to school, you usually have 3 options: get a scholarship, take out a predatory loan that you may never be able to pay off due to cruel interest rates, or have enough money that you can just pay for it. And many scholarships don't cover the full cost of tuition, so there can be a mixture of those options. But education is part of the American dream, being able to lift yourself up and have some sort of social mobility. But with colleges and universities being unreasonably expensive, many people are shut out of the American dream. Troy has some amazing opportunities to further his career, but it only creates tension between him and his friends. Troy has a seat at the table, but Chad is now serving him. However, there's a key plot point at this dinner. Sharpay makes Troy promise in front of her father that he'll sing with her at the talent show. Skipping ahead a bit, whether or not you see the next song depends on which version of the movie you're watching. In the extended version, which is the one that's on Disney+, you can see Huma Huma Nuku Nuku Apawa'a, a song by David Lawrence and Faye Greenberg that's honestly forgettable. Sharpay and Ryan seemingly take Troy hostage and have Fulton lead him to an undisclosed location where he's then serenaded. The song was named after the state fish of Hawaii, and we see that it was what she was originally going to perform with Ryan, but she boots him out during the performance and tries to get Troy to join in. Aside from the cultural insensitivity of it, this song is largely forgettable, and I guess the tension between Ryan and Sharpay is interesting, but it makes sense to me that it was cut from the original release. Anyway, even before that song, the dinner had already made Troy late for a date with Gabriella, so now he is super late. They still have the date though and go swimming in the pool before getting in trouble with Fulton, as staff are not allowed to do that. Oh, also, Sharpay steals You Are the Music in Me from Kelsey so she can do it with Troy. And she also tells Ryan that he's no longer performing in her number.
What am I supposed to do with my Tiki Warrior outfit?
Save it for Halloween. Go to Luau, sell it online. I don't know.
Troy has also been chasing the scholarship thing more and is rude to his friends in the process.
Ooh, that looks great. Hey, I almost forgot. I ordered Swiss on my burger.
Later on, there's a baseball game, and Ryan gets invited by Gabriella and Taylor to go to the game and ends up agreeing to help the Wildcats with the talent show. Most of them quit the performance though, so Ryan tries to convince Chad to join and they sing this absolutely iconic song.
I don't dance, I know you can, not a chance, no.
I Don't Dance is usually thought of by fans to be the gayest thing in the franchise, just because Chad's whole character seems to be about not liking musical theater, but it also seems like part of him is interested in it.
Have you ever seen Michael Crawford on a cereal box? He was the Phantom of the Opera on Broadway.
So in relation to the coming out reading of High School Musical, fans think that Chad is bi and represses it. Obviously this is not canon, but with I Don't Dance, it seems like it's played with. Not only is there a lot of tension between him and Ryan, but the whole premise of the song is about saying he doesn't dance while doing it anyway. Oh, and also, after the game, they switch clothes, and nobody acknowledges it. Lucas Grabeel later said that Kenny Ortega suggested that on a whim, and it was just supposed to be fun and had no other meaning. But just to be clear, at this point, Ortega had already told Grabeel that Ryan was meant to be gay. It wasn't meant to be this homoerotic thing, but I think that Kenny knew a little bit more about how that was going to come out. And the thing is, he could have changed that in editing, because I think we shot it with the clothes swapped and not. Okay, sure, whatever. Anyway, it's a great song by Matthew Gerard and Robbie Neville. And of course, Kenny Ortega is doing the most as always with directing and choreography. It's just delightful and reminds you of how much fun this movie is. Interestingly enough, after this, there's a scene where Gabriella is hanging out with Ryan and Troy seems very jealous, almost as if Ryan has any interest in her. It's easy to point out how weird this scene is, given that we know that Ryan is gay, but also keep in mind that Kenny Ortega said he wouldn't have come out until college, so I guess it can make sense. It just seems odd coming after that other scene. Oh, also, Troy and Chad argue, and Chad calls out Troy for abandoning his friends. Later on, we have the reprise of You Are the Music in Me, which does the same thing as What I've Been Looking For did in the first movie. It shows a different side of a song in a way that fits neatly into the story. In this situation, it's Sharpay dragging Troy on stage to sing with her after having forced Kelsey to give her the song and turn it into an upbeat, rock-influenced version for her and Troy to sing. Honestly, I prefer the more emotional Troy and Gabriella version, but this is also pretty iconic. Anyway, Sharpay gets Fulton to forbid staff members from performing in the talent show, and Gabriella tells her off before singing a dramatic ballad with Troy.
What about everything you've been through? What about trust?
After finding out that nobody will talk to him, and it's because Sharpay banned them from performing in the talent show, Troy goes to the golf course and sings Bet on It, a thrilling song by Antonina Armato and Tim James that shows Troy losing it and regretting his decisions and Sharpay's influence over him. Honestly, I love the lyrics in this.
Did you ever lose yourself to get what you want? Did you ever get on a ride and wanna get off?
But it's High School Musical, so you know that there will be a happy ending. Troy ends up telling off Sharpay and gets the band lifted on Wildcats singing in the show, saying he will only do it if they're also allowed to. However, Ryan switches things up by telling Troy Sharpay wants him to rehearse a new song last minute. When Sharpay finds out that Ryan did this, it turns into another Jamie Houston ballad called Every Day. This guy just has such a hold on the art form of emotional songs for teen movies. It's incredible. I love it.
Oh, every day.
And eventually the whole friend group is together on stage, and Ryan wins a Star Dazzle Award for having choreographed and put together the last performance. Everyone gets together around the pool next day for All for One, the finale number that features the Miley Cyrus cameo I mentioned earlier. And that's the end of the movie. Like I said, High School Musical 2 is my personal favorite, and that's because it's bursting at the seams. It's in the format of DCOM, but it feels like it's outgrown that formula. High School Musical 2 feels like it was made by a bunch of people at the top of their game, pushing the limits of what had been done previously with DCOMs, which is why it makes sense that the only place to go with the third one was to the big screen with a real movie budget. But we still have a bit to go before we can talk about High School Musical 3, because between the second and third movies, a lot happened. High School Musical in general still had a hold on pop culture, and as I mentioned earlier, High School Musical also appeared at the Disney theme parks. This generally included various performances recorded at the parks, and also a show originally titled High School Musical Pep Rally. And when High School Musical 2 came out, it actually premiered a few days before the TV broadcast at the AMC theaters at Disneyland's Downtown Disney District. And that was the first time that a DCOM had been premiered at one of the Disney resorts. But anyway, each time a new movie came out, the show was updated with a new name and new songs. And the High School Musical shows were not unique to the US parks. In fact, both Disneyland Paris and Hong Kong Disneyland had one of the versions of the High School Musical show, or a mixture of them at some point. And even though there wasn't one at Tokyo Disneyland, the opening song from the second movie was used in the 25th anniversary parade, and there were appearances of other songs at the main park. Eventually, after the popularity of High School Musical waned by 2010, the show was replaced with Disney Channel Rocks, which still featured songs from those movies, but also alongside new additions from the other films Disney made in the post-High School Musical world, like Camp Rock and Starstruck. But back to when High School Musical was big. In 2007, it really wasn't difficult to find High School Musical merch at a variety of different outlets. One of the most memorable for me was that trend of toothbrushes that also played music to teach children how long they should brush their teeth for. And you may not be surprised to know that there were some High School Musical songs.
This is a toothbrush, but it's no ordinary toothbrush.
Naturally, there were also High School Musical video games. They were mostly karaoke or rhythm-based, but there was also a DS game that had you doing quests while music blared over the gameplay. The games weren't really memorable, but something interesting about them is that some of the games had re-recorded vocals on the songs. I'm not sure why that is, because in some games, direct footage from the movie is used, and it seems that those are the real recordings. So maybe it has to do with how video game licensing works? I'm not really sure. But it is funny to play one of the official High School Musical games and hear what sounds like knockoff versions of the songs.
Finally summer's here, good to be chilling out. Finally summer's here, good to be chilling out.
So the merch was everywhere, and High School Musical was extremely popular. And as a 12-year-old growing up in the US, it was almost impossible to avoid it. When I started making this video, I thought it would just be a retrospective about High School Musical. But as I began writing the script, it started becoming so much more than that. When thinking back on my memories, High School Musical represented so much more than just some movies I liked. And so it was easy to see High School Musical as not just a blossoming movie franchise, but as a guidebook. And from that, I learned that life has struggle, but it's ultimately about persevering and being yourself. And just like I saw in both High School Musical movies at the time, doing that wasn't easy, but it was always worthwhile. But there was a disconnect between what I saw and what I was feeling. I saw Gabriella and Troy being in love, but I was not. And when I thought about which girl I might have had a crush on like my friends did, there was nothing. I was beginning 7th grade, and this was around the time that I realized something was wrong. And that's a scary feeling for a tween to have. But it got even worse when I realized the thing that might be wrong was me. I tried having a relationship with someone who I am still close with to this day, but in retrospect, it was more like we were just good friends, and I was just trying to fit the gender role I was given. I still loved High School Musical though. I was not yet at the point where I fell out of love with it, but as I've talked about, it wasn't just High School Musical. These movies also represented the life I was living, the life I was given. And in a post-9/11 world, for me, they represented the American dream during a time when it was being revived through nationalism. Back when I was taught that the US was the only place with real freedom. I wasn't really thinking about all of this when I was 12, but I was starting to feel uncomfortable. And by the time the next High School Musical movie came out, I'd be living on another continent with a completely different opinion. When I started making this video, I thought it would just be one video, but then it got bigger, and we still have a long way to go. As I was growing up, so were the stars of High School Musical. But I had no idea just how wild things were about to get.